Eric Porter was driving home from work in Sacramento when the sun was setting. He was tired and just wanted to get home. The radio was playing softly as he drove through the busy streets. When he came to a yellow light, he slowed down and it turned red. Suddenly, police lights flashed behind him and a siren started blaring. Eric looked in his mirror and pulled over to the side of the road. A police car parked behind him and Officer Bradley Larson got out. Larson was in his 30s with short hair and looked very confident as he walked up to Eric's car. "License and registration," Larson said in a cold voice. Eric calmly reached into his glove box and handed over his papers. He could feel the officer staring at him like he was looking for trouble. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Larson asked, leaning closer to the window. "I'm not sure," Eric replied politely. "You didn't stop completely at the light," Larson said, though he didn't sound very sure about it. Eric frowned, but nodded. "I see. I thought I slowed down enough, but I understand." Larson didn't answer right away. Instead, he kept staring at Eric like this wasn't just about a traffic ticket anymore. The officer looked at Eric's license. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked. Eric hesitated for a second. "I moved here a few months ago. My address is on the license." But Larson wasn't really listening. His questions started getting more suspicious. "Where were you going in such a hurry?" he asked. "Just going home," Eric said calmly, but he could tell something was changing. Larson wasn't just seeing him as a regular driver anymore. Eric stayed calm, but he could feel the tension building. What Officer Larson didn't know was that Eric's calm wasn't because he was scared. He was in control for a reason. Larson took Eric's papers and put them in his pocket very slowly, like he was already decided about something. "Step out of the car," he ordered. Eric gripped his steering wheel tighter, but kept his face calm. "Is there a reason for that, officer?" he asked. "I asked you to step out." "You don't want to make this harder," Larson said with a threat in his voice. Eric took a deep breath and got out of the car. Larson looked him up and down. Eric was tall and wore a nice suit, but that didn't seem to matter to the officer. "Hands where I can see them," Larson said, pointing to the front of the car. Eric did what he was told. "Is there something specific you're looking for?" Eric asked. Larson smirked. "Just routine. We've had some problems around here. You can never be too careful." Eric looked right at him. "Problems with men in business suits driving cars? Or does this have to do with something else?" The question hit Larson like a punch. For a moment, he looked shaken. He straightened up, and his hand moved toward his belt. "Watch your tone," he said, his voice getting harder. "I'm just asking a question," Eric replied. There was no attitude in his voice, just a quiet strength that seemed to bother the officer. Larson leaned closer. "You seem to know how this works. Got something to hide?" Eric let the silence hang for a moment. "No, officer. I just believe in being clear about why we're having this conversation. Transparency, you know." Larson laughed but didn't answer. He started pacing in front of the car. Something was changing that he couldn't understand. Eric wasn't acting scared or nervous like most people would. Instead, he was calm and in control, and it was making Larson uncomfortable. "You seem pretty confident," Larson muttered. "Like you think you know what's going to happen next." Eric didn't take the bait. Instead, he tilted his head slightly. "Confidence isn't the problem here, officer. Respect is." Larson froze for half a second before turning back to face him. The smugness was gone now, replaced by something sharper and more defensive. He opened his mouth to reply, but couldn't find the words. Eric's calmness was throwing him off, and he didn't like it. As the silence stretched, the tension felt electric. Larson was starting to realize this wasn't going the way he expected, but instead of backing down, he decided to push harder. Larson tapped his fingers on his belt, barely hiding his frustration. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone who looked like Eric. "Turn around and put your hands on the hood," he said sharply. "I need to check for weapons." Eric raised an eyebrow. "Weapons? Do I look like someone carrying a weapon?" Larson's jaw got tight and his composure cracked. "I'm not asking again." Eric hesitated, something unreadable crossing his face. Then, without a word, he turned and put his hands on the hood of his car. Larson came over and patted him down roughly, taking longer than he needed to. It wasn't just a search. It was about showing who was in charge. But Eric didn't flinch or react at all. "You're clean," Larson muttered, stepping back. He sounded annoyed that he hadn't found anything. Eric turned to face him. "Of course I am," he said simply. "Now, officer, if you're done—" "I'm not done," Larson interrupted, his voice getting louder. The words came out too fast, showing he needed to stay in control. "You seem to know a lot about what I can and can't do. Care to explain why?" Eric crossed his arms, looking relaxed despite the tension. "I've had my share of interactions with law enforcement. Let's just say I've learned a lot over the years." Larson's eyes narrowed. "So you're a lawyer or something?" Eric smiled slightly. "Or something." The vague answer seemed to irritate Larson more. He stepped closer, invading Eric's space. His voice dropped to almost a growl. "Listen, you think you're smarter than me? Think you can talk your way out of this?" Eric met his gaze without flinching. "I don't think anything, officer. I just believe in fairness, and so far, I'm not seeing much of it here." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Larson took it. "Fairness? You think fairness is what this is about? People like you, always—" He stopped himself suddenly, the words hanging there even though he hadn't finished. Eric's expression didn't change, but something about his posture shifted. He'd caught exactly what Larson had left unsaid. "People like me?" Eric repeated, his voice soft but loaded with meaning. Larson stepped back, realizing he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. "You know what I mean," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. "I think I do," Eric replied quietly. His calmness wasn't passive anymore. It was sharp, cutting through the pretense. "And I think we both know this stopped being about a traffic violation a long time ago." Larson opened his mouth to respond, but couldn't find words. For the first time, he looked uncertain, like he wasn't sure how to continue. The balance of power was shifting, and Larson was on shaky ground. Eric's voice broke the heavy silence, steady and strong. "Officer, I think it's time you know who I am." Larson frowned, his irritation coming back. "I don't care who you are," he shot back, though his voice suggested otherwise. Eric reached into his pocket slowly and carefully. "I'm reaching for my badge," he said calmly, watching Larson's hand move toward his gun. "No need for drama. I want you to see it." Larson's eyes followed Eric's hand as he pulled out a wallet and opened it, showing a shiny badge. "Eric Porter," Eric said casually, like he was introducing himself to a neighbor. "Head of Internal Affairs, Sacramento Division." Larson froze. His eyes jumped from the badge to Eric's face, looking for some sign this was a joke. But there was no humor in Eric's expression, only quiet authority and disappointment. "Internal Affairs," Larson repeated, his voice cracking. "Yes," Eric interrupted. "I oversee officer conduct. My job is to make sure people wearing this badge uphold the integrity and values it's supposed to represent." Larson's face went pale. His confident attitude crumbled in real time. He stepped back, his hand falling from his belt, as if his authority had suddenly become too heavy to carry. Eric stepped forward, closing the gap. "Do you know what the most troubling part of this interaction has been, Officer Larson?" he asked, his voice calm but piercing. Larson didn't answer. He looked like someone who had just realized he'd walked into quicksand with no way out. "It's not the profiling," Eric continued, "though that's bad enough. It's not the baseless escalation either. It's the fact that you've done all of this without realizing who you were talking to. You assumed I wouldn't know my rights, that I wouldn't understand the laws you're sworn to uphold. And why?" Larson opened his mouth, but no words came. Eric's gaze bore into him. "Because I didn't fit your idea of someone deserving respect," Eric finished. His words weren't angry, but they carried the weight of an accusation. "And that's not just a problem for me, officer. That's a problem for everyone you encounter in this uniform." Larson's shoulders sagged as Eric's words hit him. He looked down at the badge in Eric's hand again, as if it might disappear if he didn't look too closely. Eric stepped back, giving Larson a moment to breathe. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. "You're going to step back, return my documents, and think very carefully about what you say next." Larson's lips parted, but he hesitated, clearly debating whether to fight back or give in. The hesitation cost him. Eric added, his voice lowering slightly, "You're going to hear from me again. Not as a driver you stopped, but as the man deciding whether you're fit to wear that badge." Larson swallowed hard, his face turning red as the reality sank in. He reached into his pocket and pulled out Eric's license and registration, his hands shaking slightly as he handed them over. Eric took them without a word and walked toward his car. He paused with one hand on the handle and looked back at Larson. "Remember this, Officer Larson," Eric said. "The badge doesn't make you better than anyone. It makes you accountable to everyone." As Eric got in his car and drove away, Larson was left standing in the fading light, his confidence shaken and his future uncertain. But for Eric, this was far from over. His next move would create waves through the entire department. The drive home was quiet, but Eric's mind was racing. The encounter played over in his head, not because it was unique, but because it wasn't. Larson wasn't the first officer like this Eric had dealt with, and he knew he wouldn't be the last. But this time would be different. This time, Eric had the power to act. Daniels looked at him seriously. "What are you proposing?" "A department-wide review," Eric said without hesitation. "Not just of individual officers, but of our training, our protocols, our accountability systems. We can't keep sweeping this under the rug. If we don't hold ourselves to a higher standard, how can we expect the community to trust us?" Daniels leaned forward. "You're going to ruffle some feathers with this." "Good," Eric said simply. "It's about time someone did." The following weeks were busy with meetings, interviews, and reports. Eric worked hard, collecting data, talking with officers, and holding public forums to hear directly from the community. The Larson incident became a catalyst for change, a turning point that forced the department to face its problems head-on. Larson faced an internal hearing. Eric made no secret of his involvement, sitting across from Larson during the proceedings and watching as the officer squirmed under scrutiny. The hearing resulted in a suspension, but Eric knew the real victory wasn't in punishing Larson. It was in preventing the next Larson. Months later, the next morning, Eric sat at his desk early, sunlight coming through his office blinds at the Sacramento Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. A file sat open in front of him. Officer Bradley Larson. His record wasn't clean. There were minor complaints about unprofessional conduct, too many stops, and vague misunderstandings that had never been properly handled. Eric leaned back in his chair, thinking about the bigger picture. Larson wasn't just one bad apple. He was a sign of a deeper problem, and Eric wasn't interested in just putting a bandage on a serious wound. His assistant Linda knocked and came in with reports. "Morning, Mr. Porter. Here's last month's misconduct summary. Also, Chief Daniels wanted me to remind you about the department review next week." Eric took the files. "Thanks, Linda. Can you schedule a meeting with Chief Daniels for this afternoon? There's something I need to discuss with him." That afternoon, Eric sat across from Chief Daniels in a conference room. Daniels was an experienced veteran with gray hair who listened carefully as Eric told him about the traffic stop. "I could have written it off as just another bad interaction," Eric said steadily, "but that would have been a mistake. Larson's behavior isn't isolated. It's a reflection of how much work we still need to do." Daniels rubbed his temples and sighed slowly. "This isn't the first time Larson's name has come up, but we've always handled it internally, quietly." "And that's the problem," Eric replied. "Quiet doesn't fix anything. Quiet lets it keep happening. It's time to be loud." Months later, Eric stood at a podium during a community event, addressing a room full of officers, city officials, and local residents. He spoke not of blame, but of responsibility, of the shared duty to create a system that worked for everyone. "Justice isn't just about catching the bad guys," Eric said, his voice carrying through the hall. "It's about making sure the people sworn to protect and serve do so with integrity, fairness, and respect for everyone they encounter. That's the badge I believe in, and that's the badge we're building here together." The applause was loud, but Eric didn't dwell on it. For him, this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a better one. As Eric stepped down from the podium, he looked at the faces in the crowd. Some skeptical, some hopeful, but all listening. He knew change wouldn't come overnight, but it would come. And for now, that was enough.